got a license. NCJ 891. It's a black Monte Carlo. 2 males in it. NCJ 891. And let's try and yank that guy. Let's get up here and let's stop him if we have to. Okay, hold on, man, till we get enough people up there. All right, blow up here. They're making a right turn on 117. Right on 117. Hey, we're right behind you, man. You want to do it? Let's do it. Just look down on their guys holding up something in the front. Let's do it. Shut any car stop. Let's do it.
There's a gunfight going outside my office window. Shoot guns and machine guns.
Multiple rounds of gunfire being fired down the street. 2 cars are parked. There are people screaming.
There's some kind of a gunfight or something going outside my house. There's a lot of gunfight going on here. I don't know if the police are there or not.
There were so many thoughts going through my mind during the shootout. The immense volume of fire, especially the crack of Platts 223, immediately brought back memories for me of Vietnam. There was the dust, the noise level, the people getting shot, the inability to see the enemy at times, the overall frustration, the loss of friends. It was a firefight.
Nothing is more terrible than a battle won, except a battle lost. It was a terrible battle to win, but we lost so much.
This video presentation concerns the tragic events of April the 11th, 1986 in Miami, Florida. In a firefight lasting over 4 minutes, 2 special agents of the FBI were slain and 5 other agents were wounded.
Detective Sergeant David Rivers of the Metro-Dade Police Department was the supervisory detective in charge of the crime scene on that particular day, and he will take you through the series of events, the movement of cars, and the actual forensic side of this case. Dave?
Thank you very much, Gordon. When the decision to make this stop was made, Agents Hanlon and Morales pulled out of the line and pulled past Agents Grogan and Dove. The reasons for Hanlon and Morales pulling out in this particular configuration was to try to force the subjects off to the west. Grogan and Dove proceeded around Hanlon and the suspect vehicle to get down 82nd Avenue to block that avenue of escape. Manalzi then pulled into the rear, right behind the suspect vehicle. He stated that the main concern he had at that particular point was to take the attention of the suspects off of Hanlon and Morales and focus their attention at another area. And he decided the best way he could do this was to ram the rear of the suspect vehicle. Just prior to striking the vehicle, he had taken and placed his weapon in his lap. When he struck the rear of the suspect vehicle, his driver's door went open. His perception was that the gun went out onto the street, which effectively left him unarmed. When he struck the back of the vehicle, it caused it to disengage with Agents Hanlon and Morales. At this particular point, the suspect vehicle was in a tight left-hand turn, and when they hit the gravel off to the side of the road over here, they went into a slide in that particular direction. Hanlon and Morales had been in a tight right-hand turn, so when they hit the gravel off to the side of the road in the same area, they went into a right-hand slide. Hanlon and Morales' vehicle proceeded west until it struck the concrete wall. The suspect vehicle comes out of the cloud of dust off to the side of the road back onto 82nd Avenue. When he does, Manalzi said that at that particular point he was concerned with the fact that the suspects were now able to proceed northbound on 82nd Avenue. He initiated another ramming maneuver. He then proceeds to force the vehicle off to the east side of the roadway into the trees on the north side of the duplex. Gordon McNeil pulls over parallel to try to block a rear escape. Reisner and Aranti have arrived and positioned themselves across the street, and Grogan and Dove pull up to the rear of the suspect vehicle. There have been no shots fired yet. As soon as the cars come to final rest, all kind of gunfire erupts. Let's go to Agent Manalzi. His first concern, obviously, was to get out of that particular vehicle and get back over to where he thought he'd lost his weapon. As he opens the driver's door and rolls out, Gunfire has been coming from inside the suspect vehicle. And as he's rolling out, Agent Manalzi is hit with lead fragments from the projectile from the 223. He then proceeds westbound over to the west side of 82nd Avenue, attempting to locate his weapon and get involved in the action. Gordon McNeil pulls over to try to block a rear escape.
As I came to a stop, I was already taking hits from Platts 223. As I came to a stop, I was already taking hits from Platts 223. Because of the incoming fire, I was not able to reach for my shotgun in the back seat. I left my vehicle and took a position of cover behind the engine block of Manalzi's car and immediately took the subjects under fire with my revolver from a distance of approximately 6 to 8 feet. About this time, Hanlon and Morales, who had crashed across the street, were rolling out of their car. Ed Morales was armed with his revolver and a 12-gauge shotgun. Hanlon, who had lost his revolver sometime during the crash sequence, was armed with his backup weapon, a 5-shot Chief Special, which he was carrying in an ankle holster. John Hanlon ran across 82nd Avenue to assist Grogan and Dove. Ed Morales ran across to assist me. As they crossed, a furious firefight was taking place.
When I rolled out of that car, I saw Ben Grogan, and he was by himself. And I said, I have got to get across the street, because I put myself in his position. If I was over there by myself being shot at, the terror of being alone. You want to feel that there's somebody with you, and I wanted to get across the street and help.
I fired 4 shots initially into the windshield and driver's window of the subject's car. I later found out that one of these rounds struck Maddox. After the first 4 rounds, my hand was struck by a .223 round and was literally blown back to a vertical position. I looked at my hand. There was extensive damage, but surprisingly, I had no sensation of pain. So I put the gun back down and fired my last 2 rounds. About this time, Ed came around the back of my car, was hit in the left arm by a .223 round, and immediately fell to the ground. He later said it felt like he'd been hit by a sledgehammer. Ed then retreated to a position behind my vehicle. I sought cover beside my vehicle where I attempted to reload my handgun. To the best of my knowledge, Platt and Maddox were still in the black Monte Carlo at this point. 13 shell casings from Platt's .223 were later recovered from inside that vehicle.
In talking to Agents Orantia and Reisner, when they pulled up on the scene, Orantia did not exit his vehicle because there was an immediate threat over here, and he started to fire from inside the car. Agent Reisner exited with his 9mm, and he fired several rounds across the street over here. Now, in examining Mr. Platt's wounds, his right arm and his right portion of his chest cavity, took a 9mm round that was ballistically identified as coming from Agent Dove's weapon. One of the few times that his right side was exposed to Agent Dove was when he would have been crawling out of that window to take up a position on the other side of the civilian vehicle. According to the Dade County medical examiner that performed the autopsies, this was a non-survivable wound. He takes a round from Agent Reisner. He also takes a through-and-through round to his right forearm.
As I reached the side of my car, I knew that I was being shot at because I could see dirt flying and asphalt and gravel kicking up around me. I could not use my injured right hand, so I was trying to reload my weapon with my left hand. At the same time, I was rolling back and forth on the ground, trying to keep from being hit. I thought that if I stopped moving, that he would get me. I was having great difficulty reloading my revolver because of blood and bone fragments from my injured hand getting into the cylinder. I was fighting to survive. Unable to successfully reload my handgun, I decided to try again for the shotgun in the rear seat of my car. I stood up, but before I could reach my car, I looked in the direction that Hanlon, Dove, and Grogan were firing, and I spotted Platt. At the same time, Platt looked directly at me and he smiled. He almost looked like he was enjoying himself. I realized that he was about to shoot at me again and tried to evade the incoming fire. As I turned away from him, I felt a breeze over my right shoulder and felt a breeze and a nick on the side of my head. An instant later, I felt the full impact of another .223 round slamming into the side of my neck. I went down in the middle of the street, landing on my back with my head pointed in Platt's direction. I was later told that the round which had entered my neck ricocheted off my spinal column and traveled down into my chest cavity. I could still see and hear what was going on, but this wound left me paralyzed from the neck down for the next 3 or 4 hours. After Hanlon crossed the street, he took up a position at the right rear of Grogan's car and began firing at Platt and Maddox. After 3 rounds, John ducked down, then came back up and fired his last 2 rounds. While attempting to reload, he felt a breeze blow by his right arm. He moved a little to the left, then was struck in the hand by a round from Platt's Mini 14. This round also caused severe damage to Hanlon's right forearm and bicep. Unable to finish reloading because of this injury, Hanlon rolled over and announced that he had been hit. At this point, I was lying paralyzed in the street. Ed was wounded and Hanlon had just been hit and was lying on his back. Platt left his position behind the black Oldsmobile Cutlass and approached Ben and Jerry's car. He fired as he moved. Hanlon looked underneath the car and saw a man approaching wearing Nike running shoes. Hanlon heard Ben say, "Oh my God," and heard him go down. Platt leaned over the right rear fender and shot Hanlon in the groin. Having now been hit a second time, Hanlon rolled over toward Dove. Platt moved to the left rear of the car and shot Dove. Dove fell face down just inches from Hanlon. Saw Dove try to push himself up, but then saw Dove's body jerk twice as he was hit 2 more times by Platt's Mini 14. After shooting Dove, Platt entered Grogan's car from the driver's side as Maddox approached from the passenger side. While getting in, Platt was struck in the feet with 12-gauge double-aught buck pellets from Morales' shotgun. Ed then moved to the right rear bumper of my car, positioned the shotgun on the bumper, and with one hand fired the next round, which hit Grogan's car just forward of the driver's door. He then rolled into a seated position, placed the shotgun between his knees, and with one hand racked the action. Realizing that the last shot had missed the subject, Ed took careful aim just below the driver's left nipple and fired again. Platt's face jerked to the side as he was hit in the side of the face with several double-aught buck pellets. Ed rolled back and repeated the same reloading maneuver. Before firing his 4th shot, Ed could see the subjects apparently trying to get the car started. Ed fired into the windshield, causing it to explode. Ed reloaded and fired his 5th and final round into the same area. This time, he saw Maddox jerk as he was struck in the face. It was later determined that Platt and Maddox received numerous double-aught buck hits, none of which were fatal. Ed's shotgun was now empty. A civilian witness told us that while Ed was turned away from the subjects, Platt exited Grogan's vehicle and with ghost-like movements walked up to Ed, fired 3 rounds from point-blank range, then stumbled back into the car. All 3 rounds missed. How he missed, we'll never know. Unaware that these shots had even been fired, Ed struggled to his feet, drew his revolver, and started walking towards Grogan's vehicle. He said that as he got up, everything was starting to get dark around the edges. He was afraid that he was about to lose consciousness. To combat this, he focused all his energy on the occupants of the vehicle. He fired his first 2 rounds into Platt. He couldn't see Maddox clearly, so he moved closer and fired 3 rounds at him. By then, Ed was standing just outside the driver's window and put the last round into Platt. At this point, Ron Reisner ran across the street and told him that it was all over. Although both subjects had previously received multiple hits, they were not incapacitated until struck in the head of these last rounds. In the span of less than 5 minutes, over 140 rounds had been fired. 2 special agents and both subjects lay dead, and 5 of the surviving 6 agents were wounded.
Gordon, it's not well known that, like Ed, you were also armed with a shotgun on April 11th. You had it in your back seat, but because of all the fire that was directed at you, you couldn't get to it. Could you discuss, 1, the accessibility of equipment in an emergency, and 2, whether or not you think it would have made a difference had you been able to get to your shotgun?
I feel quite assured that in my own mind that if I had been able to get that shotgun off the back seat of the car, but where my car was and where I was seated in my automobile when I came to a stop, I was probably no more than 10 to 12 feet from the subjects in their vehicle, and I was aware of a large number of rounds, the report of many rounds coming in my direction. I knew glass was shattering around me and so forth. And I made the conscious decision at that particular time not to try and get the shotgun off the back seat, but just to bail out of the car with my handgun. I fired my handgun at Maddox from probably a distance of 6 or 7 feet, and of course Platt was right across on the passenger side, probably say 8 to 9 feet from me. And I feel that most certainly that if I had been able to get the shotgun and I had taken 5 shots with a shotgun, then I probably would have been able to end the incident right at the outset.
think it's an interesting point to note that the vehicles that had shotguns in them, where there were 2 agents, the shotgun came into play. But the vehicles that had the shotgun in them with only 1 agent in them didn't come into play. So I think that the issue of making the equipment readily accessible is an important one there. Because if you're driving, manning the radio, you can't load or reach for your shotgun if it's in the back seat.
You talked about Hanlon and Manalzi also with the weapons, and recognizing that they both, Manalzi lost the only gun that he had, or felt he had lost the only gun that he had out the door of the car. Hanlon in the collision losing his primary weapon and then having to go to a secondary weapon, a 5-shot chief. Dick, in losing the weapon, but he did it for a specific purpose. He took it out of the holster specifically because he knew there was a good chance of a gunfight here, and he wanted to have it quickly available, and he didn't want to have to reach back into his holster. Both his intentions were good. John Hanlon's intentions were good in both placing the weapons on the seats or between their legs and so forth. No one anticipated. I know you always have to expect the unexpected, but I don't know if anyone really anticipated being involved in the violent collisions that Manalzi ended up in, and that also that John Hanlon and Ed Morales ended up in across the street.
Ed, would you discuss the safety issue involved when you rounded the back of Gordon's car with your shotgun? Okay, the safety issue in question is when I was coming around the back of Gordon McNeil's car after crossing 82nd Avenue. I mean, you're all pumped up and you're ready to go. You know it's for real. You know the bullets are flying, and like Gordon said before, it's basically automatic pilot. Everything, all your training rises to the surface. And as I was coming around the back of the car, I had my shotgun basically pointed in a forward direction. And as I came around the back, I realized that the muzzle of the weapon was pointing directly at Gordon's back. And again, the training, where they emphasize safety and friendly fire, casualties, and not covering your partner with a live weapon. I raised the muzzle of the weapon up, which as it's been pointed out, definitely saved my life, because an instant slower or failure to do that would have resulted in the round coming directly into the K5 area, as opposed to hitting me up in the forearm area, which is right here. And I think as Dave Rivers pointed out, if I hadn't done that with the weapon pointed directly at Gordon's back, with my hand on the trigger guard and my finger on the trigger, the jerk reaction probably would have squeezed the trigger, possibly seriously wounding or killing Gordon. It has been frequently suggested that the Bureau was outgunned on April 11th. Gordon, would you care to discuss that issue?
I feel that we were adequately prepared. I felt that we had the weapons. I felt that we had a veteran crew, but we also came up against 2 individuals who were very highly trained, very highly experienced. Platt wasn't lucky with the weapon. Platt was very good. As Dave Rivers pointed out previously, Platt had purchased over 5,000 rounds of ammunition within 10 days of this shootout, and the man was firing anywhere between 750 and 1,500 rounds a week out in the Everglades. So he knew what he was doing.
Would anyone care to discuss the experiences they had trying to reload during this gunfight?
John Hanlon, I think he best described it, and I felt the same way after he gave the analogy of after you fire your first 6 rounds like I did and fired the 5 rounds that he had in his chief, that after you you realized that you were out of ammunition. You heard the gun firing continuing in a rapid way from the subject's vehicle. It was kind of like in him and me, just letting the air, the adrenaline just basically flowed out of both of us. And I think John best described it. If there was any time during this incident that I was fearful, it was right at that particular time. I knew after I was out of ammo I had to seek cover, but it was a very empty feeling. And I know Hanlon felt the same way, suddenly being out of ammunition. And then in my particular case, and I know in John's particular case, we both had our right hands blown up, our shooting hands. John was shot again while trying to reload his weapon. I ended up back behind my vehicle, of course, and I was trying to reload my weapon with one hand. I was making the conscious decision in my own mind as I was coming around to the car after I had fired my 6. How many rounds am I going to try and get into my weapon? 1, 2, 3, 4. How much time do I have? Is he going to come around the front of the car and take a couple more pops at me? I believe I got 4 into my hand. I finally decided I got 2 into my revolver. Tried to close it. Something as elementary and as simplistic as if you only can get 2 live rounds in, which way is the cylinder going to turn? You certainly don't want to hit on 4 empties if you only get 2 in there.
We talked about reloading a little bit. There was, I think, something you wanted to get off your chest about loading. Want to talk about that?
Well, just something that was somebody mentioned to me that they had heard that I had to reload a magazine, which was wrong. I fired the first magazine. I had an ankle holster on. My first instinct, as having emptied a magazine, was to grab for the nearest thing that had bullets in it, and that's the gun on my ankle, which I did. I fired one shot with that weapon. It's a Model 60. And having shot rounds with the 459, it just didn't seem like it was going to do the job. So that's when I put another magazine in the 459 and continued firing.
How much ammunition would you fellas recommend that an agent carry?
In this particular situation, as much as you can carry. I know a lot of agents that use revolvers go out with a revolver, no pouch, no spare ammo. And if they're involved in a confrontation, they've got 5 or 6, and that's all.
We got to talking about the position Jerry Dove was in. Try to put yourself in a position where you fired over 20 some odd rounds. You know you've hit the guy. Your gun's probably been hit, but you have no more ammunition. He had 2 magazines. Isn't that right, Ron? And we found the one in the front seat of the car, and then the one that was in the gun was empty. And the slide was back, and he had fired all of the rest of his ammo. He had nothing left.
Gil Larantia had 6 and 6. He had 6 in his revolver, 6 in a pouch, and was reaching for the ammo box in the glove compartment. The ammo box in the glove compartment is great, but if you're caught in an alley or in a stairwell or a warehouse in a gunfight, you know that ammo box in the car isn't going to do you much good. So my recommendation to people who are serious about street survival, as Ron said, is to carry as much as you can possibly carry. Could anyone respond to the reports that none of you had vests available on April 11th?
I could respond that I had my vest on that particular day, and I know Agent Ron Reisner had his vest on. All the agents, to my knowledge, had the vests in the car, but it came down so quickly. Things happened so fast that there just really wasn't an opportunity for the rest of the agents to get on the vest.
We know that people under stress often experience tunnel vision. Tunnel vision may not have been a problem for you guys, but apparently something like tunnel hearing was. Was it in fact a problem for anyone, and if so, would you care to discuss it? As I was running across the street, I distinctly remember hearing the pop sounds and which was 9mm rounds or 9mm weapons being fired, and the bang sounds of Gordon's .357 Magnum, and the psychologically devastating sounds of that Mini-14 going kaboom, kaboom, and that all was occurring as I was running across 82nd Avenue. And after I was wounded, I don't remember hearing anything at all. And I don't remember hearing myself talk. I don't remember hearing Ron or Gil yelling at me to stay down. I don't remember hearing a word. And that, just like tunnel vision, could have a devastating effect on you. And Ron says he kept yelling at Ben that he's coming around, he's coming around. Tunnel hearing and the loud noises could have disastrous consequences if one isn't aware of it. Ron, how did you feel when your shouted warnings to Ben and Jerry appeared to go unnoticed?
That's the worst part of it all. Obviously, if they would have heard me and had the time to react, it would have been a different story.
Could you hear Ron yelling when you were down on the street?
I heard one thing that Ron yelled, and I thought it was words to the effect that he's coming around the back. He may have even said Ben, I'm not sure. But Ed Morales on the ground, and when I was on the ground, we were both yelling. He was yelling. Ed doesn't remember it. I remember it very specifically because I was down and out of the fight at that point. And I was yelling also at Ron and Gil. And I could tell by their reaction that they couldn't hear me yelling. And I could turn my head and I could see Grogan over there. And when I heard Ron yell that, I could see that there was no change really in Ben Grogan's position.
Gordon, there was something you wanted to say about Ben and his glasses.
If there ever was an FBI agent that I met in my 21 years in this organization that prepared his entire life for April the 11th, 1986, it was Ben Grogan, formerly head of the SWAT team, probably the best shot we had out there, probably the most experienced and highly trained agent we had out there on April the 11th, 1986. But in a very tragic irony, when Grogan's car came skidding into a halt prior to the shooting actually starting, after Manalzi had already taken the subjects into the trees, Grogan stopped so abruptly in his automobile, the agent who had prepared his whole life for this incident. And Ben stopped so abruptly, his glasses, he wore glasses his entire life, they flew off his face and they later found them, I believe, under the brake pedal of the car. And what it came down to at the end, with myself down, Ed Morales down, Hanlon was down, Morales was down, Manalzi was injured, Aranti was also injured. Ben was there with his weapon in his hand, and he was asking, where is everybody? Because, as I was later told by associates of Ben, he couldn't see 10 feet without his glasses.
We can learn a lot from what these men experienced on April 11th. But perhaps the most important lesson is what Ed Morales is about to share with us. Pay attention to what he has to say. If you should find yourself in similar circumstances, it could make the difference. At the time that I was wounded, it felt like a sledgehammer had hit me. And I was attempting to get up and not realizing that I had been wounded. And I didn't realize that I had been wounded until I actually looked at my arm. And I have to say there was quite a bit of shock at seeing my arm because it was completely shattered and it was basically blown inside out. And my hand was twisted in an awkward position. And the two arm bones, the ulna and the radius, were clearly sticking out from the elbow about 3 or 4 inches. I looked at it and I made an instant decision that my arm was completely shattered and that it would have to be amputated. And Even though I had been wounded, I was still alive. And even though I had been wounded, there were still a subject or subjects out there who had the potential to kill me. So I had to focus my energy on the possibility of surviving and the possibility of having to defend myself at that instant. I was prepared to get at least one shot off with the shotgun.
Ed, how did you manage to function the shotgun and fire the 5 shots that you did with only one arm?
The only answer I have for that is there's a Clint Eastwood movie where he has 3 words to his troops. You have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Very simple. No one ever taught me. You know, it was just a simple matter of looking at a situation, looking at a problem, the will to see it through, the will to survive, and I figured out a way to function the shotgun. I had a problem. I only had one arm. I had another problem. I had subjects, or one or 2 subjects out there trying to injure me and my partners, and the problem was to try to stop them. And I think I told some reporters that at the time that I did what I did, it seemed that I was the only one that was in a position to do anything immediately effective.
If we can leave the people who will view this presentation with a parting message, based on the experiences you had on April 11th, what would that message be?
Probably 2 things. One would be take training seriously. You play how you practice. And the other thing is be prepared for any eventuality, because it could happen anytime.
Before I went into this profession, a lot of thought went into it. The thought of the possibility of a violent confrontation. This is not a job where you take to make some money and live. This is something, if you're not going into it with the thought of staying forever or until you retire, I'd tell you don't get into it.
I think the will to survive basically just says it all. As I was reminiscing about the incident, I was reminded of a part of a poem by Dylan Thomas. It's a poem about dying, and it goes, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." That poem had some impact on me as a young man, and I guess that you could say that I was raging against the dying of the light on April 11th. What I'm trying to say is that you have to be mentally prepared for a possible violent confrontation, and if you are shot or injured, it does not necessarily mean that you will die. I was wounded twice, and I knew that my injury, the injury to my left arm, was serious, but it was not immediately life-threatening, so I just basically ignored it. Gordon McNeil received 2 wounds, 1 wound to the chest, a K5 hit, and he is still alive. Maddox was shot 6 times before he died. Platt was shot 12 times before he died. John Hanlon was wounded 3 or 4 times, and he is still alive today. So the point here is that just because you are injured does not mean that you are going to die. You should also remember that if you shoot or injure your subject, it does not mean that he is going to die either, even if you shoot him 1 or 2 times. So it works both ways. I can say with some authority that if you give up, if you lay down to die, then that is exactly what will happen. You will die. If you give up the will to live, then I don't know how to describe it. Your spirit, whatever, will dissipate. It will disappear. That's number 1. Number 2, if you lay down to die, then most probably the subject that got you in the first place is going to come around the corner, come around the car, or whatever, and he is going to shoot you point blank, and you will die. So if you lay down to die, the message is you will die. You have got to maintain the will to live.
Ben Grogan had a very favorite short speech, which was written by Theodore Roosevelt when he was the Assistant Police Commissioner of the City of New York. And Ben liked this speech so much. I think he lived this speech his entire career in the FBI. And in Jerry Dove's short career, I know he lived this also. We all lived it on that particular day. But Ben liked this speech so much that he had it put into a small frame and he had it on his desk. And I liked it so much, he had it put on a large piece of parchment paper and framed. And it still hangs in my office, in the FBI office in Miami. And I would like to read it to you because I think it says it all. It says it all about commitment, about responsibility. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or where the doers of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who was actually in the arena, whose face is marred by the dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself on a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.